Hi everyone, I'm Jen Stowe and I'm here today with Rob Rodriguez, and we are dynamic family strategists from Family Recovery Resource Experts.
And today we're here to talk about removing labels to diffuse shame. So often families come to us and they are wrought with labels, pointing fingers at each other. He's a this, she's a that.
Right. I'm right, you're wrong.
Right. And that keeps them from moving. The most important thing to do is to kind of establish that with families. From this point forward, we're going to try and remove certain words from our vocabulary, at least while we're here. Let's remove right, wrong, good, bad, always, never, from our vocabulary as we're working here. If we could do that, what we do then is reduce our defensiveness and start looking at ourselves more honestly and more objectively.
And I think the purpose of that is when we take away those labels of right, wrong, good, bad, those are very, very limiting, right? And what we want to start to look at is the motivation behind the behavior. And when we're looking at the motivation behind the behavior and removing the label, what we find is often the motivation behind the behavior is relatively righteous, relatively positive. We're attempting to move ourselves in a good direction, and I realize I'm using labels now, but it's not malicious. It's not evil. It's not there to hurt someone else. As Rob always says, most people are trying to get from A to B the best way they know how. Right. So again, we take away the label and we look at the motivation, and that helps to reduce some of that shame. For me, being able to take away those labels and diffuse shame with families usually starts with creating compassion. So being able to have compassion for your loved one, whoever you're struggling with in that moment, and then creating some personal insight. So if I can model empathy for all members of the family in the room, sometimes who are debating and arguing very different points of view. If I can switch from person to person and be able to show compassion and empathy and model that behavior for the families, then we start to sort of diffuse the shame of the individual. We start to diffuse the blame from the family members who are there. And my goal is to not only get them to pause, right, and not say it, my goal is to eventually get them to think it differently, right? So that we're starting to think in a compassionate way. Because we know that shame doesn't live in the light very well, and shame doesn't hold up to empathy very well.
It reminds me of a couple that I was working with, and they were so wrought with labels to each other. I don't think a single sentence could pass by without them labeling each other negatively. And we were kind of stuck for a while. And then prior to our session, I had numbers from 1 to 5 on 2 different colored cards. And they began, and I decided to just let them go at it, without intervention, without stopping them. And they were going, and I kept holding numbers at random, like 3, 1, 5. Occasionally I would go, ooh, 5. And finally they stopped and asked me, what are you doing? Well, I'm keeping score.
Yeah.
I think you're winning, but you're making a good charge. And the key here is, do I really want to win, or do I want to work this out?
It's not that people aren't going to continue to struggle, and it's a process and it's a practice. But when you see couples or family members engaging in conversation together, and they are able to do that self-monitoring, they are able to say, hey, we're trapped in this.
I think one of the most humorous explanations was a husband who said, I still think all those things. I just don't say them anymore. and okay, we're partly there.
We're partly there.
So we're stopping ourselves from saying hurtful things to each other. And sometimes holding on to that one thing that's positive about this person can help me make it through this difficulty. And then maybe I can gain some more grace.
I am probably my own harshest critic. So for me, it's really monitoring the labels that I assign to myself in my head, my own shame. You know, I'm a working mother. I have 3 small children. There's always a voice inside my head that tells me, you know, I'm being a bad mom, or I'm being a bad employee, or I'm being a bad friend, or I'm being a bad daughter. And so being able to remind myself that you know, my motivation is pure, and I'm working hard and I'm doing the best I can, because those labels become debilitating for me, just like they do for anybody else. And you know, the more I think I'm a bad mom, the more I act like a bad mom. There's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So if I can free myself of that label, then I free myself to experience a multitude of different behaviors that are typically more joyful for my children to experience.
Again, she's Jen and I'm Rob, and thanks for joining us today.
If you'd like to hear more conversations about family-focused recovery, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Family Recovery Resource Experts. Thanks, guys.